If you are winter sowing Bells of Ireland now and they're not coming up, then you know it's just not warm enough. Very quick update on Bells of Ireland. So I do have a video on how I grow Bells of Ireland, and each year I've had pretty varying results. Last year I did do an experiment doing the stratifying the seeds in the freezer versus non-stratified seeds, and there was literally no difference in the results. They both germinated, and they both germinated in a pretty spotty and haphazard way. So it has been a bit of a mystery fine-tuning the growth of Bells of Ireland, but I would say my success so far, my best success, my best year, was when I kept them in the fridge in damp paper cloths. Then I brought them out and I left them in the kitchen at a warm temperature, and then they all germinated, and then I had to very delicately plant them up. I did actually get a very good result from that, but it was quite labour intensive. So the following year I didn't do that, and I did notice that they did just self-seed. So I thought, oh, that's odd, isn't it? You go to all this trouble and then they just self-seed anyway. Then I did my second experiment, which was that I took the seeds and I put them in the freezer, and then half the seeds in the freezer, half the seeds just ordinary, sown straight from the packet. I labelled them up, and again there was literally no difference in the result. So what I have noticed is that Bells of Ireland just grow when the conditions are exactly right. And if the conditions aren't exactly right, they're not those kind of tough plants that will just grow through anything. The soil temperature needs to be 50 or 60 degrees. That's not the outside temperature, that's the soil temperature, and it needs to consistently be that for these plants to be happy, and that's Fahrenheit. In Celsius, it's sort of between 10 and 16. So we've had a couple of days where it's dropped down to 8, and then a couple of days, you know, when it's been well above 70 degrees and more. But the thing is, it's not consistent at the moment. So what you're waiting for is the soil temperature, because the soil temperature will hold the heat regardless of whether you have a couple of days where it's bad or not. And that's why they seem to take longer than your other seedlings at this time of year to grow, even though they're considered a cooler flower. And if you're winter sowing, this means they'll be the last to germinate. The other thing I noticed was as they were growing, they like shelter. So I'm having more success this year now that I've got a greenhouse. They seem to actually just be self-seeding in other pots. So, and I noticed when I had them out in the garden that even when the spot was sunny, if it was exposed to wind or cold wind particularly, they didn't like that and they didn't thrive. And then the ones that looked sort of sickly because they weren't in full sun but were sheltered grew and took over the ones that I thought were in the best spot. So I learned they like shelter. My final tip, I mean, it's not scientific, it's just something I've learnt from experience, it's just something I've noticed, is that if you are growing them in pots, and I have grown them in pots. My first year they were beautiful and lush, and my second year they were kind of really yellowy and just didn't do so well. So I concluded from that, and of course this isn't scientific and it may have been other factors, but just be aware of it. I personally now won't repot them in the same pot with refreshed soil. I will just start them, if I'm going to pot them up again in a pot, I'll just start again with completely fresh soil. So I'm wondering if there's a bit of crop rotation needed when it comes to these plants, but only in a like a pot, or where they're very intensely grown so that the nutrients are depleted more quickly. In a garden they'll probably be fine. So there isn't really You can't wing, I don't think, bells of Ireland. They just need specific temperatures or they won't germinate. So for instance, I have some out here that have never germinated. Let me show you the pot. I mean, not that you need to see an empty pot, but as you can see here, they're just weeds or something else. Bells of Ireland, sown 28th of the 2nd. Now, they may germinate later when it's warmer, because obviously it's cooler out here. And although it's somewhat sheltered, it has been quite a, a tumultuous spring. There's been, as you can hear, lots of wind, and it's not just wind, it's cold, biting wind. And in here, where I really have made no effort with them at all, they've gone and grown. So that tells you they like it warm. And although they're classed as a cool flowering plant, they do like it warm and sheltered. But obviously they don't like it boiling hot, so they're not gonna, I mean, in a temperate climate like the UK, they probably will last. But if you're in a very hot climate that gets hot quickly, they probably won't. They'll peter out more quickly. But as you can see, I've got some here. And as I said, I've got some here. So some more over here. So I do have bells of Ireland. And these, although they're considered a hardy annual, I've lost every single one that has overwintered. And that's partly because I'm actually not a big fan of overwintering plants. It's just such a faff. I only overwinter plants that are really hardy and can just look after themselves. I really can't be bothered faffing around, babying plants all over winter. So, bells of Ireland, in conclusion, they're not going to grow until the temperature is right. They are almost the last thing that germinate. If you are winter sowing bells of Ireland now and they're not coming up, then it's just not warm enough. They probably will come up the moment the temperatures are consistent and warm. And they do not like the wind or any cold or anything like that. As far as I'm concerned, cold stratification has really made little difference to the germination of these plants. Although when I went super controlled and did the whole fridge in a wet, I'll link that. I did the fridge experiment in the paper towels. That worked, and I got some good results from that. But yeah, in short, they're described as a cool early summer, late spring flower, but honestly I have not really found that to be true. I found them to be quite need babying. They need it to be warm, they need the wind to be kept off them, and they do like it warmer than you think. They're not a cool flower like ranunculus or tulips or anything like that. They definitely like things to be a bit warmer. If you are winter sowing, I guarantee they're probably going to be the last of all your winter sowing to germinate, to the point where you're probably just about to throw the bottles out when you start suddenly seeing signs of life. So there's just a quick update on my experience of bells of Ireland.